Hey, what's going on, guys? Recently, UFC commentator Joe Rogan has been spewing nothing but nonsense. And recently, he talked about Ilia Topuria turning down a rematch with Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 305 in Australia, which is absolute nonsense. It's a lie. Bare minimum, it's just factually not true. I don't think he did it to be super deceptive. But Joe Rogan is checked out of the sport. He's the ultimate casual. I've already covered this in other videos. And he really doesn't know what he's talking about half the time. I think he's got too much going on that he doesn't really pay attention. He just reads headlines and then talks about it on his podcast. And then you have the lazy MMA media just regurgitating what any high-profile name says for the sake of clicks and ad revenue and whatnot. But I'm going to make this video kind of into a bunch of different topics because we're going to talk about Joe Rogan's claims about Ilia Topuria turning down a fight. We're going to talk about kind of what Ilia Topuria has said, what Max Holloway has said. We're also going to talk about UFC Spain and what's really going on with the featherweight division and a potential Brian Ortega title shot, because I believe there's more that meets the eye than meets the eye with this kind of talk of Brian Ortega, whose name just keeps coming up over and over and over again over the past few months. And we're also going to discuss how Ilia Topuria can save us from the BMF title. And I would love for him to save us from the BMF title. But let's jump right into it. Let's look at the first article. A lot of the things we're going to look at with Topuria is going to be articles because a lot of the media that he's done, he's been speaking Spanish. So, we're just going to look at subtitles anyway. So might as well just look at articles. Ilia Topuria turned down Alexander Volkanovski rematch at UFC 305 in Perth. This is why I hate on MMA media. This is the headline. Okay, that's the headline. That's a statement right there that Ilia Topuria turned down Alexander Volkanovski. But if you read in small print right here, let me make sure it's on the screen. Yeah, it is. Joe Rogan claims Topuria refused to go down under. First off, pause. They did not. Ryan, you should be a bit ashamed of yourself, okay? Joe Rogan claims Topuria refused to go down under for his first title defense in the rematch against Alexander Volkanovski. Joe Rogan claims, and I would show you a clip of Joe Rogan claiming this, but a recent video that I did where I used a couple of Joe Rogan's clips from his podcast with Max Holloway where he said this was copyright claimed. So guys, do me a favor, like this video, share this video, subscribe to the channel. I would greatly appreciate it. Appreciate your support. Joe Rogan is copyright claiming the videos. I'm kidding. I know it's not actually him, but it was actually copyright. But anyway, there's a big difference between this headline and what is actually going on here. This is Joe Rogan making this claim. And of course, the MMA media has run with it. You got DC out there saying Topuria doesn't know what he's doing. At one point, Alexander Volkanovski was kind of saying things like that, like he's turning down everyone and blah, blah, blah. And don't get me wrong, Topuria hasn't necessarily helped this case a lot in the public eye with some of the things that he's been saying, but I think a lot of the things that he's been saying kind of been lost in translation. But let's just scroll down a little bit and we'll listen to the quote. We'll not listen to the quote. We'll read the direct quote because I'm not going to show you the footage because I don't want to get copyright claimed again. I don't know who he fights next, Rogan said during a conversation with Max Holloway, but I guess he feels like he's the champ. He calls the shots. I know that he turned down the Perth one, UFC 305, the Volkanovski rematch. So he knows. Rogan's acting like he has some inside information that Topuria turned down the Volkanovski rematch in Perth, Australia, which is basically nonsense. Basically nonsense because of something we're going to look at what Alexander Volkanovski had to say, which basically proves that it's nonsense, okay? Because what Volkanovski says, we're going to look at an actual clip of that here in a second. But I think a lot of this comes from the way Topuria has kind of been acting. And here's one of his tweets. This is from April 18th. And he says, the only thing questionable, but this is about Max Holloway, by the way. The only thing questionable about me is whether I finish you by KO or submission. I just beat the guy that beats you not once, not twice, but 3 times. You now have one thing that keeps you relevant, and that would grant you a money fight, the BMF belt. I no longer fight for money, but for legacy. Winning that belt and while holding my title will cement me as the first to hold both belts, the first to knock out Volk, and what most certainly will happen when we fight. The first one to put you to sleep, something to calm you down is this. God doesn't shame anyone. You will have a worthy defeat against a champion who will be remembered for eternity. I decide who, when, and where. And if you don't like the terms, I'm sure Ortega will oblige. So there's that mention of Ortega. And I think this is kind of what really started stirring people up a bit because he says, I decide who, when, and where. And basically, if you don't like it, I'll fight Ortega instead. And a lot of people don't like that because Ortega has one recent win against Yair Rodriguez, which was a decent win, don't get me wrong, but we'll come back to that a little bit later. Let's see what Alexander Volkanovski has to say. He went on some, I guess this is Fox Sports. I'm looking at this corner, but maybe this is just a re-upload for another channel. But either way, I'll link this clip down in the description if you want to go check it out. But let's listen to what Volkanovski has to say, because he was asked, basically, were you offered the UFC 305 fight against Ilia Topuria? Joe Rogan's saying that he's turning it down. That's essentially the question here. Listen to Volkanovski's response.
I was the face of the event when I went over there and did the announcement. So I'm guessing a lot of people thought I was going to be on there. So he was even getting asked questions about it. So he did an interview. I reckon that's where Joe Rogan got this. Whether he got inside information, I don't know. Where he was like, why would I go to enemy territory and fight someone, I'm the champ, and he was saying things like that. So whether that's what Joe Rogan was going off, or he's got inside information, but nothing was ever brought to me as in we want to fight, because I've been talking to UFC and I've made it clear that I want to fight later in the year and give myself a bit of a break. I know that is later in the year, but maybe that little bit later.
So there you hear Volkanovski says, I was not offered the fight. And Volkanovski says exactly what I thought. Rogan just heard Topuria say, why would I go to Australia and fight Volkanovski when I'm the champion now, and blah, blah. There's been a lot of talk about UFC Spain. And basically, Rogan just saw some headline somewhere, just like the deceptive headline with his quote on it, basically. Well, his quote wasn't on it, but the headline about his quote. And he just ran with it. And he pushed it out to his audience. And, he just says whatever on his podcast, obviously. But the MMA media runs with it. The MMA community runs with it. And now all of a sudden, we got Ilia Topuria turning down fights. He doesn't want to fight Max Holloway. He's scared of Max Holloway. When in reality, that's just not the truth. And with all these articles recently coming out, Ilia Topuria tweeted this out earlier today, May 1st, 2024. I never turned down the rematch with Alex, as the UFC never offered me this fight. As I've said many times before, I will be the first to knock out Holloway. Let's keep this simpler. Do you want to fight? If the answer is yes, then there's nothing more to discuss. Bring my belt in your pillow. Which, when he says bring my belt, he means bring the BMF title, which I believe Topuria can save us from the BMF gimmick belt. By the way, Max Holloway is not a BMF. He's not a BMF. I know people are going to hate on me for that, but when you really break it down, he's not the BMF, okay? And then Max Holloway quotes his tweet and responds and says, bro, you're the one making this hard. Enough already. I'll quote, bring your belt, the bitching motherfucker. All you are doing is putting words together now. You're spiraling. I don't know what that means, but again, he says he'll bring his belt, but he calls him the bitching motherfucker. It seems to me like Max doesn't want to put this BMF title on the line. That's what it's coming off to me as, okay? He says he'll bring the belt, so maybe he's finally warming up to it, but then he says this, so I don't know if he's actually trolling. I hate the BMF belt. It's no secret that I hate the BMF belt. But if you're going to have a BMF title, okay, and then now you're going to fight the champion after winning a fight in a different weight class, and I have no problem. I think Max Holloway is a deserving featherweight title challenger right now against Topuria. Put the belt on the line. Put the belt on the line. Why are we... We're essentially giving out fake gimmick belts to fan favorites who are primarily strikers, and then we get to pick and choose when they defend it because we don't want them to lose the belt. Can we get any more WWE than that? So I'm hoping, quite personally, he does put on the BMF title against Ilia Topuria, because once Ilia Topuria wins, then we don't have the BMF gimmick belt anymore, because Topuria is now the undisputed champion and the BMF, which... To be honest, the reason I say Max Holloway is not the BMF is because the BMF would be the undisputed champion in my eyes. If you're the best, if you're considered the best in your division, you are the BMF. Just because the UFC makes up a gimmick belt to help promote a pay-per-view and sell pay-per-view tickets doesn't make you the best in your division. In my opinion, the BMF title is the runner-up belt. That's all it is. It's the runner-up belt. And Topuria said more. I'm not going to even play the clips because they're in Spanish. But this is something that was posted earlier. Apparently, Topuria did an interview. I'm relying on this translation to be accurate, so hopefully it is accurate. But Ilia Topuria confirms that Max Holloway will be his next opponent and sends him a message. So whenever, wherever, and at whatever weight you choose, you want me to finish you, to knock you out. One very important thing, don't forget the pillow for when you go to sleep. So there's Topuria confirming it. And then there's another clip here where he brings up Brian Ortega's name again. We'll get to that in a second. But essentially the point I'm trying to make is people are acting like Topuria is ducking Holloway, which I do not believe to be true whatsoever. I think there's some more things going on behind the scenes with the talk of Ortega, which we'll talk about in a second. But what I think is really kind of going on here is I think the UFC is trying to figure out what they're doing. I think Topuria is having some input in that because they're talking about UFC Spain, which we'll talk about more in a second, but I don't believe is actually going to happen. UFC Spain is not going to happen, at least not in 2024. And I think Topuria kind of in the public eye because he's acting a bit brash, because he's acting a bit cocky, because of the way he's acted, people have kind of gotten put off on him. I even was put off on him when he's like begging for the Conor McGregor fight and whatnot. And that's another thing I'm a little bit scared of now that I say that. He can save us from the BMF title by taking it from Max Holloway and unifying it with the Undisputed, which I feel corny even saying, but essentially it eliminates the BMF title. But what I'm scared of is what I truly believe probably Topuria is trying to do here is he thinks a BMF title is probably a ticket to a Conor McGregor fight. That's what I'm thinking. Now, I'm literally just realizing this live while I'm recording this video. I hope that he doesn't get that BMF title and say, you know what? I want to defend this BMF title against Conor McGregor if Conor does somehow beat Michael Chandler. I hope Michael Chandler comes through and beats Conor because it's going to throw ripples and ruin the credibility, the little bit of credibility the UFC has left if they start throwing out more BMF title fights. You have champions being held up by Conor McGregor who hasn't won a decent fight in since 2016, which is crazy. Well, I guess if he beats Chandler, he'll have a decent win. But you get my point. So I'm wondering if he's doing that. And we're going to look at also some delusional claims that Topuria has made recently, which is just completely ridiculous. And we're also going to look at something Volkanovski says here in a second. But what I want to talk about is UFC Spain real quick, okay? There's been a lot of talk about UFC Spain, Topuria defending his belt in Spain. I hate to tell you guys I told you so, but I told you so, okay? How often does Dana White and the UFC say, oh, we're going to go to Africa, we're going to go to Spain. They've been going to Russia for 10 years. I know that's kind of been thrown on hold over the last couple of years because of what's going on in the other part of the world. But the UFC and Dana White constantly like hype up these events where, oh, we're going here, we're going there, and then it never ends up happening. I mean, they were going to China last year. I remember me and multiple people who watch the channel regularly were saying, oh, they're not going to China. Even though they announced it, they said we're going to China. It ended up not happening. They do this all the time. It's just kind of bait. It's just kind of, oh, you know, how long when they had Izzy, Usman, and Ngannou, they're like, oh, yeah, we're definitely having a UFC Africa. Didn't happen. They got Dricus now. The UFC Africa may or may not happen. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think they're going to Spain just yet. And I think that's kind of why they're trying to figure out what exactly they want to do with Topuria, because if they could nail down the Spain event, they would have a date for that, and then maybe that date would coincide when Volkanovski wants to return. That's what I'm genuinely thinking, because Volkanovski doesn't want to return in August. He just got knocked out in late February. He got knocked out in October. You want him to turn around, so late February, basically March, 5 months turnaround after he's been brutally KO'd in his last two fights. That's just not a good look at all. That's just truly not a good look at all. Now, the other thing I want to talk about, what's going on with the featherweight division, you have this clip here, which was posted on the 30th. Again, I'm relying on the translation here. He says, Brian Ortega makes more sense. He's always ready to fight. Plus, he just beat Yair. Okay? I disagree with him. I think that's crazy for Topuria to say Brian Ortega makes more sense, but I do kind of get what he's saying. But what I think's going on here, and there's been rumors with Brian Ortega's name for months, I think the UFC had Max Holloway lined up with Justin Gaethje in the BMF title fight at UFC 300. They also had Volkanovski, who told them, look, I don't want to fight till probably winter of 2024. I want to take some time off. I've been brutally chinned. So who's the next contender? It's Brian Ortega. So here's what I think the UFC was trying to do. And maybe they're still going to do this for some reason. I doubt it. But I think they were trying to make Ilia Topuria versus Brian Ortega for the Sphere Mexican Independence Day. Perfect. They got two Spanish speakers atop of the card. It makes perfect sense. But then once Max Holloway had that viral KO at UFC 300 over Justin Gaethje, they're like, you know what? We got to take advantage of this. We got to strike while the iron's hot. Who remembers when Lorenzo Fertitta said that about Anderson Silva GSP? Shout out to the hardcores who know what I'm talking about there. But I think the UFC was thinking, okay, Max may not win against Gaethje. He may not be ready. You know, he may want to take some time off after that fight, even if he does win. And then once he won, they're like, okay, maybe we should pivot away from Brian Ortega, because Topuria versus Holloway is the fight to make right now. In my opinion, it's the fight to make. But I think that's why so many times Topuria has brought up Brian Ortega's name, because I think that, again, if Volkanovski's sitting out and if Max Holloway was to lose at 300, which a lot of people believed he was going to, maybe the UFC was thinking that as well, even if he wins, the damage he might take. But then as soon as he gets that viral KO, one of the biggest moments of the year, if not the biggest moment of the year, especially for virality, I think that's a word. But now the UFC kind of wants to pivot because Topuria versus Holloway is the biggest fight you can make in the featherweight division right now. I think it's bigger than the Volkanovski rematch, much bigger than the Volkanovski rematch. And I think Volkanovski realizes, let me let Holloway take this, because at the end of the day, does Volk want that Topuria rematch? And we're going to look at a quote that he said about Topuria versus Holloway, which is a bit delusional on Volk's part. Volk's getting towards his upper 30s. He's been brutally KO'd in his last 2 fights. If he wants to get that title back, let Topuria fight Holloway. If Topuria wins, at least maybe he takes some damage. And then also, if Holloway wins, you already have 3 wins over Holloway. So ultimately, let me give my prediction for what I think happens at 45. I think we get Ilia Topuria versus Max Holloway sometime in the back half of 2024. Maybe the Sphere, just because Topuria speaks Spanish. Maybe, I don't know. They could still stack it with Mexican fighters like Brandon Moreno and others. Yair Rodriguez, maybe. I think if Yair would have won, I think they would have done Topuria versus Yair for the Sphere. But I think that's most likely probably what happens. I'm not on that date, but I'm saying Topuria versus Holloway definitely happens. Volkanovski, because he's been a company man, because he's a UFC man, he sits out and fights the winner. But ultimately, I do not believe UFC Spain happens at all. And I am a little bit worried that Topuria does want the BMF title to hopefully move on towards McGregor. But at the end of the day, I hope that he wins the BMF title. Or, regardless if the BMF title's on the line, I hope those 2 titles merge, even if Max Holloway wins, because then you kind of get rid of the BMF title in a way, and its whole entire gimmick, which is a complete gimmick. Now, another thing I want to look at, there's 2 other things I want to look at, and I'm combining multiple topics, but Rogan acting like Topuria is a champion and turning down fights left and right when he just kind of won the belt not that long ago. It hasn't been that long. What is it? It's May. He won the belt in, was it late February or was it early February? It might have been mid-February. Either way, you have all of March, you have all of April. He won the belt 8 to 12 weeks ago, really 8 to 10 weeks ago, and we're acting like he's ducking fights just because Rogan heard an interview and probably read a headline. Just delusional. And it's just shitting on Topuria again. I don't think Topuria has helped himself greatly in the media. But let's look at something else Topuria said, because I do think there are some criticisms to be had of Topuria, because he said this recently. And this isn't really a massive criticism. I just think, I don't know where he's getting this type of confidence. This is crazy. Topuria, let's actually scroll up and look at the headline. Ilia Topuria, no doubt, has a big payday coming. And he says, look, I can tell you, I have no doubt that in 2025, I will be the highest paid athlete in the world. Topuria said in Spanish via MMA Junkie. Highest paid athlete. Okay, let's look at this. Cristiano Ronaldo headlines the Forbes list of highest paid athletes in 2023. The 38-year-old soccer player pulled $136 million. You think Topuria's beating that? No way. I think Topuria, while his confidence has helped him get him to where he is, to act like in 2025 he's going to be the highest paid athlete, that's going to rely on a lot of sponsorships. Maybe he does catapult himself into superstardom, but even if he does, Conor McGregor isn't even making this type of money until he really started having, crazy business ventures, and even still he's not making the type of money Ronaldo's making. That's just crazy to even say. Again, that's not a massive criticism. I mean, he's just thinking, oh, I want to be paid, but let's be honest, the UFC's paying McGregor probably like 15 to 20 million purse. Okay? That's how much McGregor's making. McGregor isn't even making crazy money. When he got like a $50 million payday against Floyd Mayweather, it was like insanity. Topuria thinks in 2025, he's going to be making $136 million for an athlete. You better get a lot of sponsorships. Now, the last thing I want to look at, Alexander Volkanovski apparently did an interview. I'm just going to read you a clip, or not a clip. I'm going to read you an excerpt from the article transcribing the interview. And, I know a lot of people have been saying Volkanovski's been a bit delusional about the loss. I understand fighters have to be delusional, but, the way he's coming off is selling me on a Topuria knockout the second time. I also believe Max can go out there and make the fight look easy. I think Max wins that fight. Topuria is very dangerous, a great fighter, but I don't think he's as good as he thinks he is. And of course, he caught me, right? So I can't really say much. So I need to show everyone I know I can do it too. And I'm also quite confident Max can do it, which is why I didn't want him fighting Topuria before I did. Which also makes me believe, and I'll have to go search up this full clip, that makes me think that Volkanovski thinks Holloway is going to get the fight before him now. But it's crazy to me that he just got KO'd by Topuria. And he's like, yeah, I think Max easily beats him. Keep in mind, Volk has beat Holloway 3 times. So, I know MMA math isn't everything, and I think Max could beat Topuria. But this kind of talk in utter confidence in Max Holloway beating him kind of makes me think Volkanovski's getting old, slowing down, and that self-belief and confidence, and it's getting a little bit delusional, and it's going to hurt him in the fight game. Unable to be realistic. But again, maybe he's right. Maybe he's right. But I just wanted to include that in the video. But ultimately, I really wanted to make this video because of Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan, Ilia Topuria turned down Alexander Volkanovski rematch, and the MMA media is crap. Ilia Topuria isn't turning down anyone, okay? He's not turning down anyone. I don't think he's rejecting any fight offers. I think the UFC was trying to put Topuria versus Ortega together at the Sphere. I think ultimately once Holloway got a viral KO, they're pivoting now to making Topuria versus Holloway. Maybe they're trying to get it done in Spain because that would be a massive fight for Spain. So maybe they do somehow get that done. I don't think they get that done. I think they announce it for another pay-per-view event sometime in September, October maybe. That's what I would guess. And then Volkanovski is going to fight the winner in early 2025. But that puts Volkanovski, what? Over 36 years old, which is going to be a bad time for him, It never works out well. Lower weight class, higher age, it just doesn't work out well. But Joe Rogan needs to stop with the nonsense. The MMA media needs to stop with the nonsense. Topuria wants to fight Max, but I think it's only fair that Max puts his BMF title on the line. If Topuria is putting his undisputed title on the line, Max should be putting his BMF title on the line. It's a gimmick fake belt that should be transferred to the winner. You shouldn't be able to win a belt you can't lose in this sport. It already is delegitimized the UFC enough. But let's stop having guys win belts that they can't lose just because they're a fan favorite. I don't want to see it anymore. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much for watching.